Right now, Sam Altman is demanding $7 trillion for his intelligence age, while internally, OpenAI is literally forging memos because they can't scrape together $9 billion to keep their supply chain from collapsing. You are watching the greatest financial charade of our generation. They're selling you God-like AGI, but behind closed doors, SpaceX is bolting XAI onto a rocket company to peddle a $1.75 trillion IPO backed by an idle supercomputer and a $60 billion wrapper for a Chinese open source model. The era of AI innovation is officially dead, and the era of the desperate infrastructure landlord has begun. Let's tear open the balance sheets and look at the terrifying physical reality they're trying to hide. You've got retail investors and breathless press releases pushing this narrative of imminent, God-like AGI. And sure, that fairy tale has pumped valuations to multiples that defy literally all known physics of finance. But when you actually do the work, when you tear open the balance sheets, look at the supply chain deals, and check the physical data centers, it's a completely contradictory and terrifying reality. Behind these trillion-dollar market caps, the internal situation is just bleak, to be honest. We are talking severe liquidity crisis, drained bank accounts, and massive physical assets just sitting there collecting dust. The guys at the top are running around demanding amounts of money that don't even make sense anymore, just to keep the hype train from derailing. Take Sam Altman. He's out there publicly asking for $5 to $7 trillion for infrastructure spend in his little intelligence age manifesto. Yeah, trillion with a T. Supply chain analysts are openly calling it a total hallucination. And you know why it's so incredibly ironic? Because while he's asking for the GDP of an entire continent, internally OpenAI is sweating bullets trying to scrape together just $9 billion to keep their semiconductor supply chain from completely collapsing tomorrow. And they aren't the only ones playing the game. The broader aerospace and tech sector is using the exact same AI buzzword to artificially pump their stocks before they can cash out on you. SpaceX is a rocket company. They launch things and run satellites. They make about $15.5 billion a year in real revenue. A solid business, to be honest. So why are they targeting an IPO valuation of $1.75 trillion? Because they absorbed XAI. They bolted an AI company onto a rocket company so they could ignore aerospace math and use software multiples. But what is the actual software driving this massive premium? Grok? Does Grok have a competitive moat in the enterprise space? No! Is it revolutionizing the Fortune 500? No! It's mainly used by retail users for niche applications that most people are calling AI anime girlfriends. A $1 trillion premium built on an anime girlfriend generator. May 2026 is the turning point. We are no longer in a scientific race for algorithmic supremacy. The unit economics of consumer AI are just completely broken. These companies are resorting to predatory financing and turning into literal real estate landlords just to survive the crushing weight of their own hardware costs. When you go from building cutting-edge software to leasing server racks and restructuring junk bonds, your foundational business model is fractured. So let's talk about the market leader. To understand the absolute crisis unfolding inside OpenAI, you have to look at the physical reality of making chips. This whole mess revolves around Project Nexus and a custom chip they're building called Jalapeno. Let's get one thing straight about AI hardware. There's training and then there's inference. Training is when you feed oceans of data into tens of thousands of NVIDIA GPUs to build the model. It costs a fortune, but it's a one-time fixed cost per model. Inference is what happens when a user types a prompt and the AI generates a response. Inference is a perpetual, variable cost. It never stops. Right now, running consumer inference on a $40,000 NVIDIA GPU is financial suicide. The hardware is too powerful for the job, and the unit economics are bleeding these companies dry. OpenAI is partnering with Broadcom to build their own custom silicon that isn't some grand technological leap. It is a desperate, panicked-induced cost-cutting measure. They have to stop burning cash, paying NVIDIA massive margins just to run their existing software. Of course, Greg Brockman is out there telling everyone that custom chips are going to unlock algorithm breakthroughs. Bullshit. That's a straight up lie, designed to keep you believing the innovation engine is still humming along. The Jalapeno chip is strictly an inference accelerator. It is designed for one thing: survival. But here's the $18 billion math problem. Broadcom designs chips, they don't print them. TSMC prints them, and TSMC demands massive upfront cash to reserve capacity on their factory floors. Project Nexus requires a first phase build out of 1.3 gigawatts of data center capacity. That carries a price tag of $18 billion. Broadcom is the middleman. They refuse to hold the bag. The standard deal requires OpenAI to front 50% of the cash. That means OpenAI needs $9 billion in liquid cash right now. And despite having a highly publicized $852 billion paper valuation, OpenAI does not have it. Broadcom looked at them and said, "We need Microsoft, your main investor, to formally guarantee that they will buy 40% of these chips, or we walk." And this is where it gets crazy. In late April, an internal OpenAI memo leaked. It said Microsoft had officially agreed to the 40% guarantee. Boom! The $18 billion facility, greenlit. Sounds like a massive win, right? Wrong. It was a complete fabrication. Microsoft executives immediately came out and clarified they never signed that agreement. OpenAI was gambling. They circulated a fraudulent memo internally, hoping a fake it till you make it strategy would force the supply chain to move. Why won't Microsoft sign? Because Microsoft builds versatile, standardized data centers that they can rent to anyone. OpenAI needs highly specialized, weirdly built facilities optimized only for their custom Jalapeno chips. Microsoft is looking at this and saying, we're not stranding billions of dollars in liquid, single-purpose concrete just to bail out your hardware ambitions. Now, I know you might be typing in the comments right now, but they just raised $122 billion, and how could they not have $9 billion? It's a valid question, and in March of 2026, OpenAI announced the biggest tech funding round in human history. $122 billion, valuing the company at $852 billion. So if you just took in $122 billion, why are you lying on internal memos to avoid a $9 billion bill? The answer is that the $122 billion is an illusion. It's a mirage built on corporate contingencies, non-cash swaps, and heavy restrictions. Let's break down the phantom billions. Amazon puts in $50 billion. NVIDIA puts in $30 billion. SoftBank puts in $30 billion. The remaining $12 billion came from actual venture capital and retail. But those anchor investments, they're not cash in OpenAI's checking account. Let's just look at Amazon, for instance. $35 billion of their $50 billion is locked behind a strict clause. OpenAI has to IPO or prove they achieved AGI before they can touch a dime of it. Until then, it's completely inaccessible. Phantom money, per se. The rest of the Amazon money is basically a vendor financing scam. Amazon gave them capital that OpenAI is contractually obligated to spend entirely on Amazon's AWS cloud. Amazon gets to book future revenue, and OpenAI gets to pretend they have a higher valuation. Then you have SoftBank. $20 billion of their $30 billion is currently paralyzed because SoftBank's Vision Fund is a complete disaster, dealing with its own internal loan structuring and liquidity nightmares. So you subtract Amazon's $35 billion IPO lockup. You subtract SoftBank's $20 billion mess. That only leaves you with $67 billion. And they still can't pay TSMC's $9 billion demand? Why not? Because of two words: restricted cash. When Microsoft, Oracle, and Amazon build these gigawatt data centers for OpenAI, they take tens of billions of dollars in construction risk. To make sure OpenAI doesn't go bankrupt and leave them holding the bag, these cloud providers forced OpenAI to put the vast majority of that remaining $67 billion into legally restricted escrow accounts. The money sits on OpenAI's balance sheet, which makes the $852 billion valuation look real. But OpenAI can't legally touch it to build their Broadcom chips. They are incredibly rich on paper and absolutely flat broke in physical reality. They are held hostage by their cloud providers, completely unable to finance the hardware independence they need to survive. So then what happens when the math stops working? You get a structural mutation across the entire industry. OpenAI is lying on memos just to get cheaper inference chips built. Meanwhile, Elon Musk built the chips and the data center, but he has no software that anyone actually wants to use, leaving his facilities completely empty. The era of AI investors racing to build the smartest software is dead. Welcome to the era of infrastructure gamblers. These companies realize that they cannot make a profit selling consumer AI, so what's left? Monetize the concrete they already poured. They sold you a vision of autonomous digital agents, but their only path to revenue now is acting like commercial real estate landlords. They are leasing server racks and power strips to secondary companies just to keep the lights on, and nobody proves this faster and more destructively than xAI and SpaceX. In February of 2026, SpaceX acquired xAI in an all-stock deal. They smashed Elon Musk's companies together under one roof, valuing the entire entity at $1.25 trillion. By May, they were pitching a $1.75 trillion to $2 trillion IPO. To understand how completely and utterly absurd that is, you have to decouple the actual business from the Wall Street fairy tale. SpaceX makes rockets. They make about $15.5 billion a year. You cannot mathematically justify a $1.75 trillion investment on $15.5 billion of revenue. It is physically impossible using traditional models. Acquiring xAI was nothing but a cynical trick to ride the tail end of the AI bubble. They wanted investment banks to value a heavy manufacturing company like a software-as-a-service monopoly. But xAI is a toxic asset. In late 2025, xAI made a pathetic $107 million in revenue while losing $1.46 billion. They were burning cash at $1 billion a month. They use a legal loophole called a triangular merger just to protect SpaceX from xAI's massive cash bleed, while still letting SpaceX claim xAI's fake valuation. And the product? Grok! It's a complete failure. It missed the enterprise market entirely. If you want proof, look at Elon Musk's interview on the Stripe podcast this May. Dwarkesh Patel asked him a basic question about Grok's enterprise strategy and business plan, and Elon Musk gave him an absolute word salad. In short, he had no answer. He just pivoted to complaining about politics. It proved to every institutional investor listening to that, xAI has no business model outside of being a feature of Twitter. And the hardware is even worse. They spent billions building the Colossus supercomputer in Memphis, 220,000 NVIDIA GPUs sucking up 300 megawatts of power. But having the biggest computer in the world means nothing if your software is useless. Financial reports from early May exposed the truth. The GPU utilization rate of Colossus was 11%. 11%! In cloud computing, if you're below 40%, you're in structural failure. They were burning massive amounts of electricity while 89% of their multi-billion-dollar supercomputer sat completely and totally idle. So if you have an idle supercomputer bleeding cash and a massive IPO coming up, what do? You panic. In May of 2026, xAI officially dropped the whole understanding the nature of the universe nonsense and became a commercial landlord. On May 6th, they announced they leased 100% of the Colossus 1 data center, all 220,000 GPUs, to their direct rival, Anthropic. Anthropic didn't rent a piece of it, they rented the whole fucking thing. Just months ago, Musk was publicly trashing Anthropic. He called their corporate structure evil and racist. But the second he leased them his servers, suddenly his evil detector didn't go off during their meetings. How convenient. Why did he do it? Pure, unadulterated financial desperation. When SpaceX absorbed xAI, they inherited a mountain of toxic debt, over $23 billion of it. $12 billion from the Twitter buyout and $5 billion in high-yield junk bonds used to build Colossus in the first place. To make the IPO look clean, Goldman Sachs had to arrange a $20 billion bridge loan to refinance this mess. And the interest rates? Astronomical. xAI was buying back its own junk bonds at 117 cents on the dollar just to clear the books. SpaceX needed Anthropic's billions. Leasing Colossus pays them $3 to $6 billion a year, and that money is not going to AI research. It's going straight to Goldman Sachs to pay off the interest on the GPUs. By leasing his main asset to his biggest competitor, Elon Musk completely surrendered. He went from an AI pioneer to a desperate landlord, fluffing up his numbers for an IPO. By leasing his main asset to his biggest competitor, Elon Musk completely surrendered. He went from an AI pioneer to a desperate landlord, fluffing up his numbers for an IPO. But wait, there's a problem. If you give your supercomputer to Anthropic, how do you justify the AI part in your SpaceX plus AI IPO? You buy a new shiny toy, that's how. In early May, it leaked that SpaceX secured an option to buy the AI coding startup Cursor for $60 billion. They agreed to a massive $10 billion breakup fee just to freeze Cursor's existing funding rounds. Is Cursor worth $60 billion based on software economics? No, not even close. But it serves one purpose. It gives the underwriters a $60 billion asset to point out when they're trying to explain the $1.75 trillion market cap. But here's the absolute kicker. The foundation of this $60 billion shell game is completely rotten. Cursor built a type on its Composer 2 coding assistant, claiming it was proprietary, a frontier-level AI. In March, independent devs looked at Cursor AI's API traffic. They found out Composer 2 isn't proprietary at all. The API was routing directly to KimiK 2.5. So what is KimiK 2.5 exactly? It is an open source model built by an AI startup in Beijing, China. SpaceX is essentially paying $60 billion for a lightweight user interface wrapper sitting on top of a Chinese open source model. They hid where their product came from to juice their private valuation, and SpaceX bought it hook, line, and sinker. The strategy is in absolute shambles. Colossus 1 is entirely controlled by Anthropic. The new $60 billion software crown jewel, Cursor, is just a wrapper. And by the way, Grok is essentially dead. Musk isn't building the world's best AI. He is a highly leveraged landlord hosting his competitors and acting as a holding company for a wrapper startup. So if the events of May 2026 teach you anything, it's that we need a complete reality check on this entire sector. The business model is fundamentally broken. We went from a theoretical software innovation straight into a heavy industrial infrastructure nightmare that has shattered the venture capital system that built it. This isn't an intelligence revolution, it is a massive debt-fueled real estate play. They're using complex corporate finance to hide catastrophic unit economics, and they are barely selling any actual intelligence to consumers. You have OpenAI faking internal memos about Microsoft just to survive the cost of building their own chips, while the vast majority of their record-breaking $122 billion fundraise sits locked in escrow accounts they can't even touch. On the other side of the aisle, you have xAI abandoning its mission to understand the universe so it can lease idle servers with an 11% utilization rate to cover Goldman Sachs' bridge loans before a public offering. And why are independent analysts and video essayists like myself, who have tons of skepticism for the AI industry, getting so much traction now? Because the cracks are becoming way too big to hide anymore. When a $60 billion acquisition turns out to be a wrapper for an open source Chinese model, the illusion of God-like AI falls apart. We are at a terminal inflection point. The question you need to be asking right now isn't what the tech will do next. The question is, are OpenAI lies and SpaceX's debt a sign of a massive, impending sector-wide bankruptcy? Or is it just a brutal new standard of doing business in a post-software era?